Writers who finish are constantly curious about what's on the page already. They stay curious about what the story is becoming, and they're willing to let the answers change. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and book coach. Each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now, let's begin. Tell me if this is you. You're writing your first novel or memoir. It's not finished, but you're working your way through it. Maybe you've been writing it for years, but the more you work on it, the more lost and confused you get. Or the story's just not coming together the way it is in your mind. You're still not satisfied with it, and you may even be tempted to quit and start something new. Writing can be a lonely, isolating experience, especially if you don't have the right kind of support. You may feel like you're the only one struggling and that your struggles are yours alone. But here's what I know after working with writers for the past 20 years, both privately and in groups. They struggle with the same things, every single writer. They struggle with the same things you are, just to varying degrees. So today, I'm going to share the 5 mindset shifts that separate writers who finish from writers who don't. The writers who finish their books and the writers who don't aren't separated by talent. They're not separated by how much time they have or how strong their story concept is, or even how well they write. So here we go. Mindset number 1, they don't try to write perfectly. Many writers, especially first-time novelists, sit down to draft and simultaneously try to write beautifully, or they try to write in order. Some writers spend a lot of time on their outline and their character sketches, and then when they finally start writing the first draft, they try to follow the outline in order instead of trusting to write what they're most interested in writing. That's always a good way to start because you can learn more about the story following your own instincts than following your outline. Trust me on that. Following what you're most driven and obsessed to write, that is where the energy is. Once you have that, you can start thinking about your story structurally. Others want to write beautifully at the outset. They focus more on beautiful sentences and not story. I used to fall into that trap. I was much more concerned with beautiful sentences, but my stories were relatively shallow and pretty terrible because I was focusing on the wrong thing. And then I would bring it to a workshop. I'd get praised for the language, but slammed on the story itself. I was focused on the wrong thing. Invariably, though, a writer gets stalled because the draft is rough and vast and clunky and nothing like the book they can see in their head, and they think they're the problem. So they stop. They go back, they revise the opening chapter for the 14th time. They rewrite the scene they just wrote before moving to the next one. They're trying to perfect the book and finish it at the same time. And you can't do both at once. Writers who finish have made a clean separation. When they're drafting, they're not trying to write a great book from the get-go. They're writing with some direction, so it's not just writing every idea they ever had. They're not writing aimlessly. They're constantly looking at what's on the page and mining it for what the story is trying to become, the story they're trying to tell. Sometimes there is one line that captures the whole point of the story beneath the plot. And what we aim for in book coaching is getting the book aligned with their vision. Okay, moving on to mindset number 2. They view obstacles as opportunities. Having difficulty, being challenged, doesn't mean you aren't a real writer. If you weren't a real writer, if you weren't talented, you wouldn't have the urge to write this story. And here's something I've noticed in almost every writer who stalls out mid-story. When the writing gets hard, and it will, when they sit down and nothing comes, or everything they write feels wrong or overwhelming, or they genuinely don't know what happens next, they think there's something wrong with them, that they're not worthy. They give up before they have a breakthrough. They treat it like it's some signal that something's wrong with the book, something wrong with them. So they stop writing and they think, maybe the concept isn't strong enough. Maybe I took a wrong turn in chapter 7. And they treat the difficulty as proof that they have no right to be writing this story. They should not even think of themselves as a writer. They don't have what it takes. They lose faith in themselves. Writers who finish interpret that same difficulty completely differently. They know that when they get stuck or overwhelmed, that's an opportunity. It's not a hard stop. The middle is hard because you're holding more information than you can easily manage, because the story is getting more complex, because you're doing something genuinely difficult, not because you've made a mistake or that you're not cut out for this. That distinction matters, because if you treat difficulty as a sign that you should stop, you'll spend half your writing life stopping and starting, stopping one project and going to the next, thinking it must be the story itself. And some writers stop writing altogether. Because the truth is, writing a story is hard. It's a skill. Okay, on to mindset number 3. Their loyalty is to the story, not what they've already written. This one is hard, especially if you've been writing the story for a long time, months, maybe even years. Writers who finish are not precious about their pages. They will cut a scene they worked on for weeks if the story doesn't need it. They will kill a character if that character is not relevant to the story. They will delete their best paragraph if it's in the wrong place. They will take out unnecessary backfill. They'll cut sentences and refine what's already written. They re-envision their story so they know what to leave in, what to cut, what to amplify, and what to expand. Their loyalty is to the story. The rough draft is just the current attempt at the story. It's the raw material. Writers who don't finish often have it backwards. They've fallen in love with what they've written and they feel wedded to everything in it. They have a hard time changing things or cutting things. And the story has to work around the pages rather than the pages working around the story. They're writing chapters and they're writing scenes and they're just repeating the same things with no escalation or new insight. They're not willing to cut or change anything. They're too attached to what they've written and they can't bring themselves to change it because of how long it took to write or because that's the way it happened in real life, but they can't bear to part with anything. I understand that feeling, but here's the thing. Keeping scenes that don't serve the story is not protecting your work. It's protecting your comfort at the expense of the book. Writers who finish have made a shift in identity. They're not a person who wrote those pages. They're a person building a story. And sometimes building means tearing down. And the thing is, every writer I've ever worked with has a great story hiding in the mess. So our work together is to find the story, the core story in that mess. Okay, mindset number 4. They stay open and curious. Most writers start with a concept, a premise, a character, a situation. And that starting concept is important. It's what gets you into the draft. It gets you to write. But the book that comes out on the other side of a full draft is almost never the book you thought you were writing when you started. If you have all the answers before you write, you're probably going to write something that is flat and formulaic. Because when you're open and curious, the story deepens. New themes emerge. A secondary character turns out to be more central than you expected. Or several characters are doing the same story function and they need to be compressed into one character. The book starts telling you what it's trying to be, what it's about, what it's trying to become. Writers who finish are constantly curious about what's on the page already. They stay curious about what the story is becoming, and they're willing to let the answers change. Writers who don't finish tend to grip their original concept or their outline. They decided in the outline phase that this book is about X, and they're going to write a book about X even as the draft keeps pulling toward Y. They're trying to force it back to what they planned instead of listening to what it's trying to become. First-time novelists especially do this because the concept feels like the only solid ground they have. Everything else is uncertain, but at least I know what my book is about. I know where it's going. Except you don't. Not yet. Not fully. The draft is how you find out. Writers who finish know that. They hold their original concept as a starting point, not a contract. Okay, last one, mindset number 5. They think small rather than the whole picture. The full story is crushing. 200 pages, 300 pages, 400 pages, all of it unfinished, all of it needing work, all of it sitting there every time you open your document. If you try to hold the weight of the whole book in every writing session, it's going to flatten you. Writers who finish have figured out how to put the whole book down. They're not writing a book today. They're writing this scene today. Not even the chapter. They're writing this scene. What needs to happen now at this point in the story? What does this character want right now? How does it relate to the main story goal or problem? What's in the way of getting it? That's the only question on the table when you sit down to write a scene. Non-finishers do the opposite. They sit down to write and immediately start carrying the whole thing. They're holding the whole story in their mind as they write. And what invariably happens is that they tell when they should be showing. They summarize rather than dramatize. They move too quickly. They rush through dramatic moments. So thinking small is not a lack of vision. It's a practical strategy for doing work that would otherwise overwhelm you. The writers who finish their books have learned that you can only write the book one scene at a time, so that's exactly what they do. So there they are, 5 mindset shifts that separate writers who finish from writers who don't. They've made peace with a rough, bad draft. They don't treat difficulty like it's a condemnation of their ability to write. They're building a story. They're not protecting their pages. They stay curious about what the book is trying to become. And they put the weight of the whole story down and just write the next scene. None of these are about talent. You wouldn't have the urge to write this book if you didn't have the ability to do it. And none of them are about having more time or a better concept or the perfect writing routine. They're about how you think about the work while you're inside it. And the good news is that how you think is something you can always change. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.